So welcome everyone to tonight's Sunday night series. We will be having a group of past fellows who will be speaking to us, talking about tips and tricks for how to succeed in fellowship. So we have a couple of different speakers today. We have Ben, who trained at Baylor Scott and White and is staying on in their Waco satellite. And then we have Kelly, who trained at University of Minnesota and is going to be practicing at University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. Dave, who trained at Albany Medical Center and is going to be practicing at Christiana Care. Jen, who will be joining us a little late, who trained at University Hospitals in Cleveland and will be staying on there as staff. And then Olga Garcia, who trained at University Hospitals as well and is practicing at Nellis Air Force Base. So we have a selection of questions for our panelists, and then feel free to put questions into the chat and we will go from there. Let's go ahead and start with everyone just kind of introducing themselves. I'll help moderate. We can just go in the order that you guys are in my screen. Ben, do you want to start?
Sure. So thanks, Susie. I'm Ben Goff, like Susie was saying. I just graduated from Baylor Scott and White in Dallas, Texas. But before that, I was at Christiana Care, where Dave is now, where I did my general surgery residency. And just like Susie was saying, I just took a job, which I start September 6th, the day after Labor Day. But I took a job in Waco, Texas. It's a non-academic job. I don't have any residence or anything like that, or no academic affiliation, but I'm in a big private hospital. But I'll dive more into that later. But thank you, Susie, and thank you everyone for hosting this tonight and having me.
And then Olga.
Got to unmute first. Hi, everyone. My name is Olga Garcia. So yeah, I trained at University Hospitals in Cleveland, did my residency in Ventura, California, at Community Memorial. It's a community program. So was very different from like the academic setting of fellowship. And I'm currently practicing with the Air Force on active duty at Nellis Air Force Base, and that's in Las Vegas. And then our contract is such that we also go to the University Hospital downtown just to get extra volume. So I can talk a little bit more about the military track if anyone is specifically interested in that. I know you might think that you're already in fellowship and it's too late, but it's definitely not. So let me know if you have any questions pertaining to that aspect.
Dave, you're next on my screen.
Dave Palange. So I did my residency at Rutgers, Newark, and then went up to Albany for my Colorectal Fellowship. Took a job at Christiana Care, which is an academic center. I'm hospital employed. Kind of a weird mix of hospital employed and private practice people at Christiana Care. So we can talk about hospital employed benefits, I guess. And I've been out of practice for a year. So first year under the belt, and a little bit of insight there too.
Okay, and then next I have Kelly.
I'm Kelly Harbaugh. I did residency at the University of Michigan. I went to the University of Minnesota for fellowship, and then I am getting hired back at the University of Michigan. I'll be primarily based at a community hospital that's about half hour away from the main hospital, and I'll be tenure track, so I'll be somewhere around like 50% research. That's about it.
All right, so our first question, since we're all about a week in with varying amounts of actual clinical time given onboarding, is what would you recommend focusing on the first few months of fellowship? You can go in whatever.
So I'll go first. So I would say in the first few months, I think you should really focus on just doing it's going to sound ridiculous, but doing as much as you can. So like making sure that you see every consult so that you understand the pathophysiology about it, reading up on it every day, doing as many operations as you can, and seeing where your weak spots are. So for me, I realized as I did that, my weaker spots were rectal, because we didn't have a lot of that in my residency. So after the first couple of months, I seemed to realize, all right, I'm pretty comfortable doing a right hemi, I'm pretty comfortable doing this, but I'm not comfortable doing fistulotomies and making that decision or putting in cetons yet, or doing lift procedures or anything along those lines. So then I focused more on that. So I think just trying to figure out in the first month or two where you're weak and where you should focus on really helps. And then last thing is really don't neglect clinic, because then you're going to just like be doing a ton of clinic at the end, which is also not great. Because once you get out into practice, you're the guy or the girl, and you're sitting there with the patient staring at you and like, oh man, I probably should have done a little bit more clinic, but try to keep it even, pretty much.
So I would say be really gentle on yourself and your expectations. Being in a completely brand new environment for most of us is pretty challenging. And I say most of us because perhaps, you know, you're doing your training where you did your residency, but I imagine that's the minority of people. So I would say like take some time like understanding the hospital culture, you know, how the different services run, who your consultants are that you're going to be working with primarily, you know, whether like GI, IR, et cetera, how responsive they are, like where the radiologists sit, who your body radiologists are, like when all of the important meetings are that you want to be attending, like your tumor board, for instance. So make sure you're getting on those emails. And then just like how to book cases, you know, where the OR staff is, that's important for you to know. And, you know, as you kind of get like oriented and understand all those things a little bit better, you can, you know, start focusing more on, you know, if you're doing a research project, you know, what that might be, because, you know, you're going to be submitting your abstract pretty soon. And then ultimately also sign up for CARSEPS, which is like the question bank, because CARSITE's going to take place in November. So you do want to have that available to you when you have some free time.
Yeah, I would echo both what Olga and Dave said in that sense, where the beginning of the year is going to be overwhelming, where when you think back to when you were an intern again and all the frustrations about how's the hospital function, how do you, you know, everything Olga was saying, how do you book a case, how do you, you know, how do you want to communicate with the attendings, what's the culture around everything, you have to learn all that stuff again. So you got to give yourself a little bit of time and be a bit patient with yourself in that sense. But then what Dave was also saying is understand where you're coming from in your training and kind of identify your weaknesses. And I guess I think of that more from like a technical standpoint, where in residency for me, example, I did a bunch of open, you know, colorectal stuff, but in terms of getting more MIS experience and doing that, that's what I wanted to put myself in on, and getting more anorectal cases, because the volume's going to come. I mean, all these places are accredited and you're going to get the numbers eventually with that. You know, certainly don't miss out on any index cases, but then just start to figure out where your weak points are and balance that out as the year progresses. The other thing too, and kind of related to everything being busy at the beginning of the year with just learning a new system, getting your research project going, because that due date's like October or something like that. And then also, you know, CARSITE coming up in November. You know, this isn't the year to, you know, have a crazy research project that's going to, you know, change the world with everything. So, you know, if you do have that, that's great, and you know, pursue that with everything. But this is really a clinical fellowship for 1 year, so you shouldn't burn yourself out at the beginning in terms from a research standpoint. That wasn't the expectation where I'm coming from. You know, it's not a crap project, but you know, putting something together quickly is difficult in this 1 year.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything everyone said. The only things I would add, I guess, would be, you know, I think just kind of summing up what they were saying, which is figure out how to succeed in the environment you're in. And so, you know, coming from a strictly like at Michigan, we only were at the university hospital. And then in Minnesota, 80% of your time is in a private practice in a community hospital. And the expectations were just very different of how you as a trainee function within that system. And so, you know, I know for our cohort of fellows, like it was pretty frustrating at first because we just kind of like, it was just so vastly different from being a chief resident where you're responsible for everything about everybody all the time. But then, you know, I think once you're able to like settle into your system, you can really dive in and like make sure that you're getting the most, you know, doing as many scopes as you can. Definitely start that at the beginning. I mean, maybe some of you are really good, but I was like totally awful. And that took, you know, a good like 11 months before I felt like I could get to the CCUM regularly, and even still struggle at times. And I totally agree with like figuring out what you really need to focus on in fellowship. And I think like just in broad strokes, figure out what your priorities are for the year. So, our program, we didn't actually have to submit an abstract for the research project. And there was like every 2 monthly reports where you had to like embarrassingly say what little progress you made, but then nobody like checked up on you whether you published your paper. Sorry if there's anybody from Minnesota on here. But this is like coming from somebody who wants to do their life in research. But for me, like this year is not about another paper that can benefit me. And I'm not building any networks of, of collaborators this year. So I really, leaned into the clinical aspects because that's what I'll never have another opportunity for. And then the final thing I would add is it's a big year, like not just from fellowship, but you're going to be taking boards and you're going to be getting a job. So, you're going to stress out about that up front, but I would say like everything comes with time and will work out. So these first month, like the first few weeks, especially just lean into like figuring out what you're doing, and how you're going to get the most out of your fellowship. The board stuff will be next. And then the job stuff, like we'll talk about that, I'm sure, but don't even think about it at first. People will try to scare you that things happen faster than you think. But to be honest, like most people I know didn't have a job until well into the new year. And like, even for me trying to push things along early, I did a lot of work for absolutely to no avail. And so I would not have worried about that in hindsight.
So that's going to be a little more fun.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. By the way, if anyone thinks of any questions that they want asked, just add them to the chat. So kind of going off of what was just said, any essential textbooks or resources that you guys recommend using beyond the ASCRS textbook or CARSEP? Kind of what did you guys use to study and read throughout the year that you found helpful?
I used
Say,
this textbook like pretty much exclusively. I don't know if you guys have other thoughts. And then for questions, we did CARSEP. And then I'll also say like I honestly didn't like study for CARSITE beyond what I was already doing, because it never comes back to you.
Well, obviously we have to plug for our educational series. And definitely if there's any topics that you feel like you need to cover, make sure that you submit your suggestions. But I'm sure most of you probably already are aware of the clinical practice guidelines on the ASCRS website. Those are pretty dang up to date and super high yield for those topics, rectal cancers, fistulas, etc. So make those your best friend. I have them like downloaded on my computer, all the PDFs, and they're highlighted and just, annotated everywhere.
Yeah, I would say the same thing that Callie said. And from a textbook standpoint, I just use the green textbook. And I think it's going to be purple this year or something like that. Just the ASCRS textbook. And we had a pretty strict like conference schedule in Dallas as well. And so, I mean, when you're just immersed with, talking with 12 colorectal surgeons every single day about colorectal surgery, like you're getting a lot of input as is from that. So in terms of like journal clubs and reading papers and all that, that kind of just gets presented to you throughout the year. So having to pick other resources who are in deep with the butt stuff for this, so you'll get plenty of it.
Yeah, I agree. So learn the basics, right? So the textbook is huge, but I think it's also important to have a good colorectal atlas. There's a book that's like one for abdominal procedures and one for anal rectal procedures. I think it's just called Atlas of like colorectal, anal rectal, and abdominal. It's actually really, really good. And you really only need to read like one of the chapters because the robotic laparoscopic are like exactly the same except for port placement. But they're pretty up to date with all the procedures, and even some of the older procedures that we don't do anymore are still in there. So you can at least have a basic understanding of them. And then I agree, those clinical practice guidelines are like pure gold. So
hi, I'm Tess Ollett. Sorry, I'm gonna hop on. I'm was the same year as Olga, so I did my fellowship at Leahy, and then I'm at UMass as an attending now. The only thing I'll add is if you guys don't have the ASCRS University app on your phone, I would highly recommend downloading that. That was just recently rolled out and is a new kind of platform, and it's great. That was just rolled out right around the time of the meeting. So it's pretty user-friendly. It has the 4th edition ASCRS textbook online. It has all the CARSEP questions online, in addition to the clinical practice guidelines. So it's kind of one-stop shop. Additionally, I mean, most of us, I feel like as residents had this, but downloading the like NCCN guideline app as well, especially for your, rectal, anal, colon cancers. That's a helpful resource to have on your phone.
Okay, next question I have is, can we transition to talking about job search and kind of what was your timeline for job search, your process, kind of what factors influence your decision to choose private versus academic positions, kind of everything job related.
I'll just say that I was already committed to Uncle Sam after I finished training. So I thankfully didn't have to go through that process, but I'll circle back when the time comes.
So, Tess, you probably went through the same thing, but when we were graduating or in fellowship, it was like the height of COVID. So there weren't a lot of openings anywhere, which was also a big problem. A lot of places were on hiring freezes. So personally for me, I knew I wanted to be in a place with residents and academics and teaching, not so much the research side, but I like the teaching side of it. So that's kind of what I looked at, and thank you, Ben, because you're the reason I found my job, unknowingly, but I got lucky as there was one opening at Christiana and I applied for it, and it kind of was what I wanted, and I wound up getting it, but it was the only job I was really open at the time and the only one that I interviewed for. So I just kind of took it because it was what I was looking for, and it was really like the only thing on the website at that time. That was like December 2021, I think.
So I can go next. Oh, sorry, if you want to go, Ben. Okay. So I think like the biggest thing is like doing some soul searching and figuring out like what is really important to you, what you'll prioritize. For me, I really wanted to pursue NIH K to R pathway. And so that kind of narrowed down the places that would really support that as a faculty surgeon, because you have to be, I mean, technically 70% research to be an AK, but they will flex to 50% for surgery. But that's kind of like a money losing endeavor. So I had a few strategies. So one is I reached out to a lot of like people that I had some connection to, whether it was like somebody who was a previous faculty during residency and is now like a faculty or a chair or something like that at another program that I thought could support that goal. I reached out to other colorectal surgeons that I knew were kind of pursuing that pathway. And then I didn't really ask them for a job, but I asked them for advice and just said, like, this is what I want to do. You're doing that. Any thoughts or advice for how I should approach the job search? So I kind of did that through the fall, and put together my list. That didn't really turn up like any true job prospects, but I got a lot of great advice in the process. And so I thought that was helpful. It did turn up a couple where like these people may be hiring. So I reached out to them, but like none of those opportunities really panned out. I'd say the biggest way, I would definitely look at the Askers job board. That is where I found almost all of the places that I ultimately interviewed at and how I applied to the positions. And then there was, also like in terms of the reaching out to people, There was like one job that I heard through just from word of mouth. They never actually posted the position. And so I did like, I cold emailed somebody there and said, I heard you're hiring. I think like your environment would be excellent for what I want to do. Here's what I want to do. Here's a cover letter. And so in terms of timeline, so I like started all those emails through the fall because I was like totally freaking out about it. And I didn't actually start interviewing until I think I had my first interview in like November, I want to say. I had like my first first interviews then. And then I went on a second interview. I think my first one was end of December and then January. And I think the really interesting thing, so I ended up interviewing for 5 positions. One, I didn't get invited for a second. It just wasn't a good match. And then the other 4 were just kind of on their own timeline. So that was where things like got kind of weird because in fellowship and residency, you know, everything's on a very strict timeline and everything else is like, you've got a timeline, but like you're really on subject to whatever their timelines are and none of them really align. And so I am really excited to be going to Michigan because all my family's here. And I thought this was really the place where I would be the most supported to do what I want to do. I found out about, I got my job offer in January. I ended up with 2, and then I narrowed it down to 1 from there and just like gracefully threw from the other ones. Once I knew where I was going to go, or once I was down to 2, I told the other 2 people so that we wouldn't keep going. So, but all of that I didn't actually like sign until probably February. And that was pretty par for the course, I think. I mean, I don't know about everybody else, but most of my co-fellows, we were all kind of like figuring things out between like February and like March-ish was kind of, I think, like the peak of it. But I guess biggest advice is watch the job board. And you can check that pretty frequently and then talk to people, you know, or like I thought reaching out to people doing what I wanted to do was really helpful.
So my job search was a little bit funky. So my wife is a pediatric neuro-oncologist and we finished fellowship at the exact same time. So doing the dual job search with that wasn't fun, but it was doable in the end with that. But so I guess what I'll add, because I think my situation is a little unique in that sense and not much to add there. But what I will add is when I came in, I think I was similar to Dave, where I really thought coming in, I wanted to pursue academics in the sense of medical education. That was kind of my niche. It's what I've done in terms of, you know, like question writing and things like that. And then working with like GME sort of stuff. So I saw myself kind of moving into a GME role and being in a residency program in some sense. And then just from my fellowship experience, we do 2 of the months, we do more of a community-based or more of a, you know, suburbia type hospital with that one. And when I went up there, I was like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I want. Like I felt like I like woke up from Stockholm syndrome all of a sudden and just felt, I don't know, it was just for me. Like it just felt like a good fit for me after kind of, you know, 5.5 years. It just opened my eyes with that. And so I started pursuing that. And in my job hunt, I interviewed at 4 places, and it was 2 academic and 2 more community based. And again, the community ones, I honestly went on the one that I took down in Waco, and I have no connections with Waco. All I know is the silos and Magnolia and the cult, and outside of that, I had no connections with it. So I thought it was going to be my practice interview. And I went down there, and it was just joining this guy. He's hospital employed. He used to be private practice. He's probably in his mid-50s, late 50s. His entire practice is already set up. He's just a good mannered, you know, just a Southern gentleman essentially with that. And I was like, you know, and the contract was beautiful. I mean, they're going to, you know, Waco's kind of middle of nowhere with that one, but the contract worked out very, very nicely in that. And just being in, it's just so well supported from like top to bottom, and meeting the CMO and having that small environment, it just felt right leaving the interview. And that was early. So again, that was my practice one. So that was like November I had that, and I had an offer at the end of November. I didn't sign with that. I didn't even sign my letter of intent until like May because of, you know, my wife doing the dual job search and everything. So I wouldn't recommend stretching that out for 6 months. That was super, super extreme, but kind of just like a plug for that job. They supported me so much, and I was in communication with them. They were just like, we're going to hold this spot for you. We really think you're a good fit. And so I feel very indebted to them, very grateful for the opportunity I have and just how well it worked out with it. But again, it's just a unique situation with me and my wife in that sense. But my kind of wrap that up, I would just say you can be flexible. You can come in thinking one thing and transition to the other with it. Still, you have time, but don't decide that in like November, December sort of thing. A lot of the jobs are going to be coming out probably December, January is really kind of the hot spot. I think Cal, you're probably on like you were saying, par for the course, or like the earlier side. Even I feel like a lot of people stretched it out even to like May, June, even with some of it. But I thought it was going to be going in. I thought it was like, okay, August 1st, let's go, let's start looking for jobs. That's not the case. Like October, November, once you get out of ASCARs, shake a bunch, or getting the project, and that's where you should start thinking about cover letters, what you want to do and how you want to pursue that.
The other thing I wanted to add was the career course. Ours was virtual, but it was super helpful, I thought. I thought especially because depending on what you've been in terms of residency and then in fellowship, they had some awesome talks just about what practice is really like in private practice or in a hospital practice or in like a research practice. I thought the majority of it was super high yield for thinking about this next stage. And you really don't need to be doing anything really before that. Besides, I would just say like starting your soul search of what you think you're looking for. And sorry, one more thing just to add is same thing Ben said is actually the two jobs I came down between where, my end vision was still the same, but it was going to be two very different routes. Where one was definitely not as sort of traditionally academic. And was almost like it was a practice where a lot of it had been almost exclusively private until a few years ago. But they had a really big push to become more academic. And so it's like, it could have been a really, really cool opportunity and I had a hard time deciding, but I kind of applied there almost on a whim because it was on the job board and, I thought it was a cool location. And it totally blew me out of the water in a way that I wasn't expecting. So keep your mind open.
We had a nice comment in the chat. Shrey wanted to ask, what's your advice for a person whose significant other is still training for another year after fellowship ends? Would you recommend job search or locums, a second fellowship? Kind of what are the different options and kind of how would you recommend going about them?
That's a tough one. So just because I had to think about that a lot. I don't have a great answer. I'll start off with my short answer with that. But I was thinking about having to do that because my wife was pursuing a fellowship even beyond peds hemonc, but everything ended up working out. I don't know if it's true, and if others comment on this, I'd appreciate it. But I was always kind of told, that there's taboo associated with locums, like having a locum on your CV or on your record, maybe there's taboo. I don't know if that's the case or if others have heard the same with that. I think Jen would probably be the best person to answer that since she was in that exact situation, but she's not on yet, is she?
Jen was having problems logging on and has some stuff, but Tess just texted me and said she's happy to talk to that.
Okay.
Yeah, so my husband actually finished a year ahead of me. So I was still in fellowship while he was taking his first job as an attending. So when we were applying to fellowship, trying to figure out, my rank list, we kind of made in cities where we thought it'd be easy for him to get a job. Thinking as a backup that, if things did not work out, he couldn't get a job, that he would maybe consider doing locums. But again, he kind of he's head and neck oncology, wanted to be doing, what he had trained to do and not just locums ENT. It worked out. When I was at Leahy, took a job at UMass Memorial as an attending and was in the perfect practice for what he wanted to do. And so for me, my job search, again, trying to navigate dual physician and subspecialty can be a little bit challenging. I did try to keep my mind open, but we had wanted to stay in the Boston area just because he really liked his job. And as David had mentioned, there was not in the COVID time period was just not a lot of options for hiring for colorectal in the Boston area. So I ended up, and both me and my co-fellow were wanting to stay in the Boston area. So I ended up applying and interviewing in Chicago, which is where my family is from, just thinking, all right, well, we'll see, maybe if, there's a perfect job, we can relocate and he'll have to find another job. And then did apply to, really, I reached out, cold emailed, like all of the Boston hospitals, nobody was hiring. I reached out to Dr. Makel, who's a division chair of colorectal at UMass, and he basically said, both to me and my co-fellow, previously we've had one other fellow who stayed on and done a super fellowship clinical associate year. We haven't had one recently, but if that's something you're interested in, we might be able to reinstate that and have something for you to do for the year. And so, I interviewed for that, and ultimately ended up doing that because, that meant my husband and I would be at the same hospital. So that's what I've been doing this past year, secretly and openly saying, and, when I interviewed for the position, they had been wanting to hire somebody for a while, but again, due to COVID and hiring freezes, so, took the position knowing that best case scenario, if I liked it and they liked me and things worked out, hopefully that could be a full-time position. And luckily that did happen. So I am, now staying on full time. And so I think, again, trying to be flexible, and obviously there's not going to be the perfect job for everybody. And even this year, as I started, really loved the group, loved the practice. There was the first few months, I still did interview for other positions in the Boston area because, wanted to keep my options open. And so, I did interview at several different other places. And you're going to find, some practices are going to be, more or less general surgery than you may or may not want to do. So, that's something, again, as people have said, you don't have to jump into the job search right away, but just start thinking about kind of what things you might want to incorporate in your practice. But yeah, ultimately it worked out. And so my husband and I will both be at the same hospital, but we had entertained, the idea of, what was going to be an acceptable commute for us to say, an hour radius, we live somewhere in the middle. So yeah, I'm happy to answer or talk to whoever asked the question more offline. But it, is can be very challenging and stressful, and there's really no right way to do it. And a lot of it's just kind of word of mouth and, talking to people, networking, and a little bit of good luck too.
Switching tracks a little bit off colorectal and going back to Gen Search, since we all found out about Gen Search written boards, Gen Search oral boards are all on our mind, and trying to keep all the melanoma and breast knowledge in our head. Can you guys just briefly talk about what you did to study for oral boards?
Practice.
Yeah, some of that.
Go ahead, Ben.
No, I was just I took mine in the spring and I thought it worked out nicely for me. Honestly, I think it would have been fine earlier in the year and probably would have been fine in the spring too. I just happened to actually I signed up too late, and so there weren't even any spots left in the fall. So it was divine intervention. But yeah, my program director luckily likes to do oral board prep with all the general surgery residents. So he actually blocked off our basic science lecture for a month and would just run through that with us and just do oral board situations over and over again. So that was nice. And then just I did the Osler course. I got that funded from residency. I didn't think the world of the Osler course, if we're being honest with that, but I thought that, and I know we have the affiliation, but this true experience, I really thought very highly of the Behind the Knife series. I thought that was phenomenal and a really, really good resource that came out this year. But yeah, I wouldn't freak out about doing it in the fall or spring. Either one will be fine.
Yeah, I echo. I mean, I took it in the fall just to get it done. I did the Osler course. I agree. I mean, I thought it was fine. It was a good kind of forced way to listen to however many hours of material. I had to pay for it out of pocket, and so that hurt me in my heart and my pocketbook. But I do think that, like, for me, I figured if I didn't pass boards and I hadn't done the Osler course, I would have major regret. And if I got Osler course, then I would at least know I did what I could. So I did that. And then I read, like, I mean, I had like an aggressive study plan of which I adhered to very little of, and did some of like the clinical scenarios book, the demic book, I thought was overall pretty helpful for like, especially, you know, the high yield topics. And then I agree with practice. I think my biggest regret was not doing, like, just enlisting more people to practice with me. I think my biggest surprise was how quickly the pace moves during the oral boards. So when you are practicing, I would try to encourage people to like really crank you along, because I think not everybody remembers how fast it goes. Especially like they give you like a large volume of information pretty quickly, and I was still like reeling from the case before. So that I would definitely practice. That's the biggest thing.
Say practice, practice, practice. Find some friends or a good chief resident who's gonna practice with you over and over and over again. Try to do as many cases as you can. There's I forgot what that, maybe somebody mentioned it, but that I think it's called the Blue Book or whatever, has cases in it that helps. That's what I read. I read that twice. And then I did the Osler course too. I thought it was helpful because, at least for me, it was all videos because it was COVID. So I watched them all at like 1.5 or 2 times speed. So you could do it faster than being there or sitting there. And I definitely picked up some like vascular stuff that I totally forgot about because I hate vascular and just like kind of washed it out of my brain. And then realize you're going to get, some cases are always the same, right? You're always going to have a trauma case. You're always going to have some sort of breast case. You're always going to have like some sort of general surgery, like, I don't know, something they can ask a million different ways, like gallbladder disease, like that kind of stuff. You're always going to have something like that, or something simple like a hernia. And they just want you to work through it. And the last thing is surgeries. You should be able to define them in like 4 or 5 key steps to show that you know how to do the operation, because you're going to get a question on either a Whipple or luckily I got a J pouch, which was awesome. Like my first question was a J pouch. I was like super happy, but like to be able to describe one of those procedures in 5 steps to show that you know exactly what to do, they're going to say, great, awesome, move on. And then the last thing is when you get like a Whipple question, it's not always a question about like, do you know how to work a pancreatic cancer or do the Whipple? A lot of times it turns into a nutrition question. So don't forget about nutrition, because they'll then use that to like, well, the patient's malnourished. How do you want to, you know, how much protein should they get and what should your TPN be at and all that kind of stuff. So just be careful, because sometimes they're looking for like nutrition rather than like pancreatic cancer, or that's also common with like esophagus too. But
Yeah, I agree with all the above. I also took the Oslo course. I thought it was fairly helpful. I thought the scenarios were a little bit easier than what we ultimately were asked on the boards. I thought BGK was great. I actually listened to a lot of the reviews while I was like working out. So, you know, you kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone that way. But personally, I liked taking it in the spring. That way it wasn't like the pressure of studying for that wasn't sort of like hanging over my head, and I could just kind of focus on one thing at a time, kind of getting into a routine with fellowship. I think it's fine to use review books. There's a bunch of them out there that are good. Just pick one that's like reasonably up to date, and then take advantage of any practice sessions that the residents may be doing wherever you're at, and you know, try to attend those. I'm sure you would be welcome. It's just a matter of like coordinating it with your operative schedule and stuff.
I did take a week off in the fall too, leading up to it. It wasn't like the week just before, but I took a random week off so I could get through the Osler course and step away from clinical for a little bit.
I took a week too. I think that was super helpful.
And then the last question I have is, tips and tricks in general for success, or kind of anything you wish you had done more in fellowship looking back.
You said more of in fellowship? I wish I went to clinic more.
Or less
Like,
of, I guess.
I think clinic is super important, and I did not start off very balanced, and then got balanced throughout the year, and then spent a lot of time in clinic the last 3 months. But I kind of wish I had started that more at the beginning. But when you're going to a new place, you're nervous and you want to show the attendings that you know what you're doing, you can take care of patients and all those kind of things, and you have to build up their trust, and some of that you do in the hospital, taking care of the patients when they get sick and calling them and letting them know, hey, we should do this or that. So I would just say try to stay balanced, and do clinic. Everything else is going to come. Like, you're going to get your operative skills, you're going to get everything else. But if you're not in clinic, you're not going to learn what to do with certain patients in the office. You also won't know like what procedures you can 100% do in the office, or how to set up your office wherever you end up. So where I wound up is in a surgical oncology group, but I'm their colorectal surgeon. They're not set up for anything anorectal at all. So being in clinic, I learned a lot of like what table we should have, what scopes I need, all those kind of things, and how to clean them, and all that logistic stuff you don't really think about. But I learned that in clinic. So when I came to my job, I was like, this is the equipment I need, this is how we get it, and this is what we need to do to keep it, to help the practice grow. And then learning at your own institution, then you have a bunch of red tape, but that's a different story. But all that helps. If you're not in clinic, you won't learn it, and you won't see it, and you won't know what you can do or can't do.
Okay, I can go next. I do actually have a list of bullets that I kind of want to run through real quick. The first one may or may not pertain to you. So I was pretty much a solo fellow. We did have Meredith, but she was off-site, and so we would only see each other in person like once a week at most. So I would say like find a support group of some sort. So whether that be other fellows elsewhere that or maybe some of the chief residents, they're not really going through the same thing. So I do think having other fellows that you talk with on some regularity is helpful, just to kind of vent or see how they do things differently, maybe where they are. As far as like the service goes, one suggestion I have is like, don't really over rely on the residents and the juniors on the service, and make sure you're kind of like checking their work, because ultimately you're the one responsible for patient care. But you can over rely on your mid-levels, because most of the time they have been with your attendings for a long time, and they kind of know what they're doing, what the expectations are, how things run. Make sure that you're logging your cases, pretty quickly after they're done, so that you don't have a backlog, and that you're logging your robotic cases separately if you're planning to attain a certificate. Something that I did was keeping a notebook. So when I would read ahead for cases, I would make notes, and then I would make notes about like how we did the cases themselves, just to like keep that for the future. I would put in like some of the case cards from different attendings and how they did things, what kind of instruments they used. In the OR, commonly people talk about how they learn to do things in residency, and I think that kind of gets on people's nerves sometimes. So I would caution you in not doing that super frequently. And then I would say, as much as it can be hard to do, but try to prepare the day before for clinic, just to make notes and see what kind of patients you're seeing, so you can read ahead. so that you're not doing all of that and scrambling kind of last minute in between your patients. I'm still doing that as an attending, so it just helps things run a little bit more smoothly, and I'm much better prepared to counsel people, etc. That's all I have.
So,
Well, I think that last point was a great point, and that should be echoed, is the preparation before. So my fellowship was also a single fellow, but we didn't have much weekend call, which was nice. So I would take every Sunday and I'd look through every case and every patient throughout the week and make notes. And I think that's a great point and something that really helps you and gets you ready for, one, the mindset of the week, and two, what you're going to be doing that week, and you know what to read about and where to study and where you're weak. So I think that's a great point.
I mean, I definitely should have done more clinic. So I'll echo that, and just do it early again. I came in and I just get excited about operating, and I still do with that, but I got too excited and I just didn't spend enough time in clinic with that. So that's on me. Kind of going back to what we already said, identify your weaknesses, and then just, everyone's fellowship is going to be set up differently, but if you have input into where you can be, or kind of make your own schedule, just be honest with yourself, and be honest about where you see yourself in your career. And once you sign a contract, to recognize what your role is going to be, and talking to your future partners about, hey, what patients are we typically going to be seeing, what's my niche going to be, and all that stuff, and then build that up at the end of the year. Something that I did early on, and I wish I would have done more of throughout, but I just made like a template on I made like a template of like basically just an abdomen, and I would have like how the patient was positioned, who the attending was, where the patient was, and I could like write on that or do it on my cell phone or whatever it was, and share it amongst all my different, all my different media, or whatever you want to say for that. And just having how everybody does their cases and the specific steps with that, and just being able to remember that as the year went along, but also having that going forward. If I, oh, I remember I liked how Dr. Sabang did his lap totals. How do I want to like do that? Being able to just quickly go through that and say, oh yeah, I remember he did that trick, or he would say that. So being able to edit that quickly, case to case, was really nice. If I could go back as I'm kind of going through the basic science stuff, I wish I still have access to the same epic I had with that, but I wish I would have honestly made like dot phrases as I went through each chapter, just for like clinic notes going forward. And it's a little bit on the extreme side, but like if you're taking notes with everything, being able to, make sure you're asking these questions, I think it acts as like a good review and making sure that you're being thorough. But again, that takes, a lot of, planning ahead to make those sort of templates, but a guy can wish.
I'll find out all my regrets in about a month, but thinking back, I similarly took notes on cases, especially the first half of the year. In preparing for the case, I would take notes on how I thought we would go through, and then I would take notes right after on what we actually did. And then especially because we work with so many different faculty, then being able to do how they each did it, I found that super helpful. I totally wish I would have done that more, because I totally slacked off the second half of the year. And actually that's when you start to absorb like the nuance of all of the like tricks that they're using. So that's definitely going to be a regret. We were required to do 2 half days of clinic a week and 2 half days of scopes a week. So I'll probably, once I start clinic, also regret not having done even more, but I would say making sure you're like consistent with it throughout the year was definitely, I thought, helpful. Other things are paying attention, not just to like the clinical care, but understanding how people structure their practice, how they get through their notes in clinic, or whether they do them after, how they structure like their dot phrases. And you can certainly like steal everyone's templates from Epic pretty easily. Same with pick sheets. You can, if you have Epic, you can go through and steal like what their pick sheets were from before. So we kind of like collectively as a group like stole a few of the people's that we all kind of like identified with the most. And then I definitely echo what Olga said that was just coming to mind, is like you're in fellowship, not so much to impress them on what you've learned from residency, but more to learn what they're doing. And so, if they ask you like, how would you do this? Of course, you want to have a plan in place, but otherwise really just trying to do things the way each of them did it. Like we had a couple of attendings that did hand assist, many did straight lap, many did like straight robot, like almost strictly robotic. And so just figuring out like, and you know, like even the robotic ones would use a different set of instruments and have different ways of retracting the rectum. And so just trying to mirror what they do, even if it feels awkward and wrong, it's usually just because you got to figure out exactly how they're doing it, and then having all of those tricks down the road if you have a hard case. I think that's the big things.
I would add in there, now that I think about it a little bit more, is you're doing a case with your attending, and you may be, mobilizing, doing a medial lateral for a sigmoid or whatever, but you're not retracting. Learning how to retract is super important, because you may be at an institution where you have residents and you want to teach residents. So now you're showing them where they cut, but learning the subtleties of how to retract the colon to get them to look exactly where you want, or to get up through a difficult splenic flexure when you have, a fatty mesentery or shortened mesentery and all of that, is really difficult if you don't practice that before, as I learned really early in my practice. I mean, we all catch up and we all get there anyway, but just trying to be like, wow, how did my attending give me that like perfect view that make me feel like I was doing the case perfectly, right? Because you want to set up your residents for success too, or whoever is assisting you. And you're going to have to, if you're not with residents and you have PAs helping you and not your partner, you're going to either have to retract for a PA, or you're going to have to teach the PA how to retract. So I would say not always doing the case, but learning how to retract is a huge part of it as well, especially laparoscopically. Robot, you can make the robot arm do whatever you want, but laparoscopically, it's a little bit more difficult.
And if you have opportunities to practice walking somebody through a case, I think something else that we kind of learn as new attendings is just giving directions and very clear instructions on what you're wanting them to do, whether it's patient right, screen right, using all those different terms for like pull or shove, or insert is a little bit more gentle, so don't shove the retractor in. Just things of that nature. Pay attention to how others do it. Maybe they have a better system, or use your little like robotic cursors.
Thank you so much for everyone's time. We have one more question in the chat, and then we'll go ahead and end the session. Shrey wanted to know, there are multiple kind of courses throughout the year between the career course and the robotic course and several others. Are there any that you guys went to that you would really recommend?
Well, Dr. Stein would be super upset if we didn't put a plug in for the career course, and thankfully Callie already did that, but it's like a one-day thing. I think a lot of the programs will, let you have the day. So there's a whole panel, and they talk about different practice types. They talk about like negotiating contracts, appropriate compensation, things of that nature that are super, super practical. I think they intentionally schedule it after car sites. So, that's kind of already past you. Your, abstracts are submitted if you're doing that. And so, you can take the day to kind of think about more life things and money things.
I totally agree. I think the career course is like, I think that should be kind of a given. In terms of the other courses, I planned to do the robotic course, but then I got assigned to July, and by July, like life was such chaos that I decided not to go. So I don't think I did any other courses aside from the career, and it was virtual last year. I don't know if it's virtual this year, but it was like totally not a big deal. Our co-fellows, we just set up like a screen and got carry out.
Yeah, definitely do career course. I did the robotic course and it was fine. Like, I don't think you miss too much if you don't go there, but I think it also depends on what your robotic experience is. So, if you have a lot of robotics, it's probably not going to be that high yield for you. But if, you want to get into it and learn more, then I think it's certainly a good opportunity. And then the other thing is, you got to go to ASCRS, and that's, great to finally meet everybody. But again, I think that's kind of a given.
Ben or Callie, did you do the endoscopy course by any chance?
No, and again, I think that's kind of one of those things where be honest with what your practice is going to be. Like, just like Callie was saying, like scopes aren't as like maybe I'm just not great at them, but like they're not as easy as like, when you watch the attendings going like so smoothly, you got to get, your solid, I think I did like 100 and some odd during residency, and I did about like 200, 250 during fellowship. So, and I feel comfortable with them now, but like, do I feel like I can go in and start doing ESD and EMR like right off the bat? No. So I didn't feel like it was a practical course for me. I think it'd be cool to see people do it, but aside from like that, it wasn't for me.
So the reason I asked is because when I did the endoscopy course, it was virtual and it wasn't all that helpful because you didn't get the hands-on part of it. And yes, they talked about EMR and ESD and like being able to see that was kind of cool because we didn't do much or any of that in my fellowship. But they had a portion of it at the beginning, which was trying to get through difficult colonoscopies and like different maneuvers that you would use, looping. And I think there's supposed to be some sort of like hands-on experience during that section of it to like get you used to like reducing a loop or what a loop feels like and all those kind of things and the different maneuvers you can use. But I didn't have that because it was virtual, so I didn't think it was helpful. So I thought maybe if you guys went, you could speak to that or whatever. But because I think it would be worth it if there was a hands-on part for that, I think it would be very helpful because the virtual trainer is terrible. So when you're compared to a real thing. So
Yeah, I can't speak to it personally because I agree. I mean, in my practice, like we are probably not going to be, I'm probably not going to be scoping a ton because we don't get screening scopes just based on the agreement at the hospital with GI. So I didn't feel like I would ever have enough to do like EMR, ESD. That being said, one of my co-fellows went, and then one of my co-chief residents from residency who was at another program went, and I think they both thought it was like relatively helpful. The one, my co-fellow, like actually wants to do advanced endoscopy, so totally for that kind of, but then my other co-chief resident, I don't think she wants to, but she said that there were some definite useful parts around just like getting through difficult colonoscopies and things like that. That being said, it's in person now, so you'd kind of have to like weigh that against the value of, like missing a couple days of fellowship, or like whether you could get that from, working with your faculty locally. And I can't speak to that.
We do have one more question in the chat. I know we're coming up on time. If you guys, don't mind answering. Huda asked, going into practice post-fellowship, was it difficult to set up the practice to the same standards as your training hospital? And I guess, guys have been talking a little bit about tips and tricks in terms of how to set that up already.
I think if you're going in someplace with the expectations that it's going to be the same as your training location, I think you're setting yourself up for failure, unless you're actually staying at your institution. So I mean, my situation is maybe a little bit different than everyone else. I replaced a colorectal surgeon who's an excellent, academician and clinician and all that stuff, but like our clinic is still not really set up to do procedures. We can't even get like a rectal cancer MRI protocol in our hospital, so they have to go like off base into the city to get those things done. And that of course includes things like, pelvic floor PT, etc. So it's a pretty small hospital and just a very different environment than what you get used to in training. So I think you have to, probably prioritize and kind of focus on the things that you definitely want to do. Like, for example, being able to do flex SIGs in the office and making that happen. It's probably going to take time. I don't know. Or, when you're looking for jobs, if it's something that's really important to you, make sure it's already available or it's in process of becoming available.
Yeah, I think I can't really comment on it because I haven't even started yet, but I think Callie and Jen would be in kind of a similar spot or Jen staying at the same hospital, so it's probably going to be pretty similar.
Yeah, I can't speak to it. I mean, all I know, so the community hospital I'm going to doesn't have any colorectal surgeons yet. So we've been even like Googling and figuring out which hemorrhoid bander to get. So I'm sure that there's going to be some growth in the process. But I also think like when you're thinking about standards, like your standards can mean many different things. And so like, I'm not going to have suction in clinic. So there's no point in doing like rigid proctos. And obviously there's no like flex sig if I can't even do a rigid procto, but we've started to think through like my setup is going to have like clinic in the morning and scope time in the afternoon in the same building. So like, the standard is different. I'm not going to be able to look in the clinic, but maybe there'll be opportunities to still deliver like expedient care to patients on the same day. Or same thing, like, I think once you know where your job is and what's going to be available, use that to frame your experience for the rest of the year. So like, I mean, I know this is again like a silly little example, but like I don't have suction, so I'm not going to be doing suction banding. And so I, focus more on doing non-suction banding. But like, it doesn't mean you're delivering worse care, you're just delivering different care, and you kind of set the standard of care that you're going to deliver. So
yeah, I think starting your attending practice is another just enormous learning curve. And that's kind of why all of us are talking about, pay attention to all of the different like things that your attendings do and the instruments and so forth, because you're going to be getting asked what you want to use. And if you don't know, then you're going to be kind of clamoring about, not every small hospital is going to have a tumor board or like a multidisciplinary IBD meeting or pelvic floor. Like if you're going from a university to a community hospital, it's just going to be a huge transition. But it doesn't mean that it's worse. It just means that you have to adjust your expectations and make it work for your practice the way that you want to build it.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much to all the panelists for your time. We'll be rejoining next week on August 14th, and Dr. Jean Ashburn is going to be talking about reoperative colorectal surgery. So have a nice night, everyone.
Good luck, y'all.